This is Family Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Brett Hill and the Mindful Coach. And welcome to the Family Electric Ghost podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Want to let people know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You see that icon up there. It says listen on Newsly. If all the listeners use that coupon code of GHOST, they can get 1 month free premium subscription. We will be on Newsly later tonight as an audio only version of the podcast. And we want to let people know that we also, for those of you just listening, we have your URL of the mindfulcoach.com on the screen. That will be fully clickable. And if the audience does click on that URL, what will they see when they click on your URL?
They'll go to my main website, which has the details about how to connect to me and all the other stuff that I'm up to. I got some stuff going on.
Okay, that's cool. So I want to let people know that we'll be able to click on that when we're published, and that'll be good. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about what is mindfulness and why should I care, and let everybody know this is actually our episode 977 of the podcast.
Wow.
So we've been on the air since 2016. We're getting closer to episode 1000, and so
yeah,
we like to talk to people around the world, and we're talking to you right now, and thank you again for being on the show. So maybe you can talk to us about your definition of mindfulness.
Well, thank you. I tend to lean towards the John Kabat-Zinn is the guy who sort of brought mindfulness over to the generic Western world, and got to start in sort of Buddhist studies and said, this is some pretty cool stuff. So maybe we should kind of make a Westernized version of it. And so he created his another version, kind of went through the main teachings and said, okay, so let's do one that isn't like grounded in Buddhism. And so what is that? And so the actual practices of, what do you sit down and do to actually become a more mindful and present person in the world? And his definition is the one I leaned into. And it's one that is like paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And those are the three main points that he makes. And if you have all three of those things going on, then that's what he would call a mindful moment, more or less.
That's interesting because, I practice a form of Buddhism, Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism, which is a Japanese form. And it had like the concept of like the law of attraction and cause and effect. And just this different techniques to get into mindfulness through meditation, through chanting and focusing on just doing your mantras. But it's just a mindset that where you it's a different than maybe the Western mindset. And so you get into this concept of actually, listening to not just yourself, but the whole world.
Yeah, actually listening. Imagine that, right?
Yeah, it's hard.
Well, it is because our inner world is so noisy that when people start to actually, like one of the common things that happens when people start to practice some kind of mindfulness, or you can call it what you want to, but basically whenever you start to notice what's actually going on in your head and in your body and in your mind and your heart and your emotions, the whole thing, you start to turn your attention towards what's happening there. People kind of get a little rattled because they're like, oh my God, there's a lot going on in there, and it's a little bit noisy, and maybe I'd rather not hang out in that noisy place. I'd really rather be back in my external form of noisiness, scrolling or whatever you're doing to get through the day, all the activities of the world, because we live in a very complicated, busy world, and that'll consume your whole life if you let it.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of break away, and when I lived in Japan from 2004 to 2006. And what I loved about Japan is in the middle of Tokyo, where all these parks and people were doing Tai Chi or people were could go off out of my tall building in my salaryman outfit and walk to a temple park and just do Tai Chi or meditation and get away from all that technology. Turn off the
Yeah.
phone, turn off whatever,
Yeah.
and just get in touch with. In the middle of all that high tech stuff is this thing that looks like it's from like 3,000 years ago, and you're like,
Yeah.
wow, how is this here? And the fact that they had spaces like that,
Yeah.
it's a different mindset that they allow spaces like that in the middle of such a technology area, such a money kind of area, to have the idea that you could have spiritualism in the same place was like very, to me, is like an epiphany. And I was like, wow, that was
Well,
a
it's great
big
that you
thing.
had that experience, but like you mentioned, you had to go to another culture to experience that, right? It's kind of like,
Yeah.
and you had to like get into a whole different set of cultural norms. And so my question to you is like, what did that do for you?
Well, it really helped me a lot. There's a couple of points in my life. Well, that was a big point. And how I got to that point is actually I was a cancer survivor.
Oh yeah,
At
man.
age 27, I survived a level 3
At what
sarcoma.
age did you say?
27, I'm 56. So
Holy moly, man, that's early to deal with that.
27, I had a level,
Wow.
yeah, level 3 sarcoma on my back, had
Oh
multiple
my God.
surgeries and maximum radiation. And after that, I survived it. And then I just said, there's a lot of things I've been doing that were limiting beliefs, things where I didn't think I could do something. And I said, wait, I survived cancer. So
yeah,
how could
exactly,
I not,
right?
how could I not travel? Like, how could I not, like, I was scared to travel. So I'm going to go to Japan. Like, how could I not get to the front of my
Wow.
band and become the singer? How could I not go and read poetry at
Nice.
clubs and take the mic and do this show? I mean, so the pre-cancer me wouldn't have done this. Wouldn't have
Yeah.
gone to Japan. Wouldn't have done all the things I'm doing today because I got rid of my limiting beliefs because I went through a crucible moment
Yeah,
and I
that's your
survived
origin
it.
story,
I said,
right?
why am I
That's your
scared? Yeah,
yeah,
so why am
yeah.
I scared? It shouldn't be. It was limiting myself. Nobody else was
Well,
doing it. I was doing it.
yeah, right. And it took that kind of of an event to kind of like snap you out of your limiting space, and wake you up into what's possible. That's a thing. There's I somehow I knew I was going to talk about this today. I was thinking about this podcast and I had this intuition. This is going to come up. I don't know if you ever heard this crazy old master who's long gone now named Gurdjieff. And he had this teaching, and one of them was called third force. And it's a really powerful notion. And that's that, you're kind of set in your ways, and we kind of do things the way we do things, and we kind of walk through. In the mindfulness world, they call it the default mode network, and when they mean your neurology, right? Like these are just the things that you do automatically. You get up, you make your coffee, you read the latest, whatever's on your phone, you catch up, and you take, you just do your morning, you do your day, and you come home and you rinse and repeat. And that's just the default mode network. And you can spend your whole life like that. Now, to interrupt that takes a pretty powerful force, like what you just experienced. And Gurdjieff called that a third force because it comes from the outside into your life and has enough force in your world to kind of shake you out of your quote unquote slumber or your default mode. And then you wake up to a whole new world of possibility, which I'm so happy that you took advantage of and said yes to. Why not, right? There's a world out here and I can explore it.
Well, I think a lot of people with fear. When I've talked to a lot. I mean, I'm a musician. I got all my synthesizers and my keyboards and stuff behind me in my home studio. But a lot of people, when I was 17, if they didn't blow up by the time they were 21, they stopped. I was one of the guys, that they didn't stop. I didn't stop because I played music not to be something like try to be like the Beatles or be whatever, Smokey or whatever. I did it because I love it. And loving it wasn't going to stop if I made it or didn't make it. I love it. It's cathartic for me, and I just kept on doing it because that's to me was like it's a process for me. It's part of my therapy.
Yeah,
and so it wasn't never going to go away.
Yeah, I tell people like that. I say, if you're a musician or you're an artist, it's not optional.
No.
It's who you are. So it doesn't matter. It's like I used to sing in a band. I played guitar and played my way through college. So, I logged a lot of stage time back in the day, and it was a ton of fun. I loved it. But I met enough what I call pretenders in a way. It's kind of like, they were in it for the juice and not because it was in them. And and there's such a difference, and it's kind of like I'd meet these guys like, well, I can't do that because I just don't have the instrument for it, and I'm going, dude, I don't care if you've got a tub and a string, you can make music with it if you're a musician, right?
Yeah, you can do anything. I mean,
you would.
Yeah,
and,
well, you street performers in any major city
exactly
do what they do. I mean, it's like Americana. You go back and look at an Americana band like the Band in the basement with Dylan doing not the best equipment in the world, not the best tape in the world, and they put down some of the best music ever. And it doesn't really matter.
I was out at a farmer's market yesterday near me in a place called Port Orchard, Washington, and there was this young woman singing. She had a ukulele, and she was singing at this gazebo, and she wasn't like a fabulous ukulele player. She's just like on the beat, 1, 2, strum. But her singing was like, holy crap! I'm just sitting there going, hey. Can you hear this? Because this is off the hook. And she was unbelievable. And I'm just, there's talent all over the place. And here she is at some gazebo in a little city in Washington, just knocking them down. And,
that's the way they have to drive. And, the authentic. I've always been into independent and emerging authentic voices. That's why I started the podcast. I initially was only talking to musicians, and I wanted to draw attention to, not the big players, but the people that I thought should be listened to.
No, that's great.
No matter what the genre was. And then I got very expansive and said, I'll include poets. I'll include painters. And then I got into life coaches and CEOs and CFOs. And so I got very expansive, and the common thread was creativity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the mindset behind it is that whether you're a life coach or a CEO, you still got a sense of creativity, and you got to have some, concepts of like, how do you live your life?
Well,
have these ideas of like, now, if you're a CEO, you should be mindful, or you might not be in business.
Well, I hope you're mindful, because you're going to be the thing about mindfulness is you're going to be better at whatever you do if you're more mindful about it. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Yeah. I don't care if you're, sewing, for costumes for dogs. You're going to be better at it. And I'm not trying to diss that, by the way. That sounds like a fabulous thing to do. But you're going to be better at it if you're more mindful and present and creative.
Well, I think it's like a holistic. I think that like the whole idea of like holistic thinking, like I came from a college that's very holistic, kind of Socratic method, not like just the SAT, but the professor would ask you at the end of the term to put it down in a blue book, not by multiple choice, but to explain the concepts. Yeah. And you're going to fail or pass based on how well you could actually not just regurgitate that facts, but actually explain and thread the needle of everything you learned and put it in your own words.
Yeah.
And a lot of times today we don't get that because people they want to just answer the A, B, C, D. It's like, no, you need to explain to me, in your own words, what it is.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's in the way that I organize around taking in new concepts and information. That's what I call integration. It's like you have to do this piece where you integrate. It's not like, here are the bullet points, but it's like you understand the structure and why it's there, and you understand what's missing as well. And so you can like read between the lines, and you can restructure, you can rephrase, you can reformulate based on the people that you're talking to, so that they have a better understanding of what you're doing. And that's when you've really got mastery of the information is when you're able to just kind of on the fly reconstruct your point of view based on who you're talking to. And that's part of mindful communication, is be aware of who you're speaking with, who you're speaking to, and hearing the way that they can hear, learning how they can hear in a way that informs you about how to speak.
It's like the audience. If you're a musician and you turn your back to the audience and you don't listen to their feedback,
yeah,
then like, well, how good a musician are you going to be? Because the point is, like, when you get into that kind of flow state and you're with the crowd, you either interact with the crowd and you get to be better, and it gets to be a two-way street, or you be like, I'm the artist, you're the audience, and you want to draw lines.
Yeah.
And then it's like, is it really going to be a good experience? Because are they really connecting to you? Or are you connecting to them?
Yeah,
and
well, that's the magic word, connection, right there. It's, it's kind of like, I mean, they're standing up there and just reciting a performance, in which case, they don't really care. You're just doing a recital. But if you're connecting with the audience, oh my God, that's like a gigantic experience that is unlike anything else.
Yeah, I think that's what you have to do. And I think that applies to an artist. It applies to you at work. Do you connect with your fellow coworkers, with your boss, with the supervisor? Do you connect with the customer?
Right.
Or do you like get annoyed with the customer and you want to put down the phone? As soon as you hear them on the phone, you want to put the phone down. It's like, was that really connecting? Is that really going to bring the business forward? If you're just trying to rush through everything and complete it without really thinking about how good are you completing that? Did you really have a good message? Did you actually even hear what they said? You're just thinking about 5 steps to be putting the phone down.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, and so many times I've been on the other end of a conversation where I actually like in sales calls, when someone's trying to pitch you on something, and I get the feeling like I actually kind of interested in what they're doing, but they're just going through a script. And if I say something to them like, well, this is what's important to me, and they go, oh, well, that's interesting. Now point 2, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going, hey, if you had said one word to me about how you heard what I was saying and you could understand where I was coming from, you would have made the deal. But instead, you just went on automatic. And even though I'm interested in what you're doing, I don't feel connected, so I'm not going to do it.
Well, I think that comes from people trying to be perfect. Like, I find a lot of people, like, the enemy of creativity and like progress sometimes is perfection, or trying to repeat something or clone something, thinking that represents the goal.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Yeah, I mean, and I'm wanting, somebody who, like, if you're going to play a cover song, you do it your way, and you don't do it the same way twice, right? It's like
not note for note.
Yeah, exactly. And because it's like you're different every time, and so the song should be different every time.
Yeah, I mean, a big example to me, like I always talk about this, is like I love Hendrix and I love Stevie Ray Vaughan. Right?
Oh yeah, man.
They both did Voodoo Child. Jimmy wrote it, but how Stevie reinterpreted it, it's a Texas blues version of it versus like a cosmic psychedelic originator version, right? So Hendrix's version is kind of radical and it's very, very rough. It's kind of loose. It's kind of jazzy. It's kind of fusion. Mitch Mitchell plays the drums like a jazz fusion drummer.
Yeah, he was amazing.
He's not totally on time, but you listen to Stevie's, his drummer is more a timekeeper.
It's true.
And he is more exact in his interpretation. But both versions can stand on their own, but they're totally different. They don't sound the same. People might think on the face of it they sound the same, but they don't.
Well, yeah. I mean, only in a very superficial way do they sound the same, right? It's kind of some of the same notes.
And that interpretation is totally different. That's how you do it. Like when you interpret it, Stevie has a version that some people prefer because they like how he interpreted it, and other people are purists. They're like, well, Hendrix wrote it. That's
but I mean, come on, Stevie was off the hook. I mean, the guy was unbelievable. The first time I heard him, I'm like, I'm pulling the car over going, who the hell is this?
We don't hear a lot of people like that in this age anymore.
No, you don't. You don't get a lot of that kind of authenticity
Well, there's
authenticity.
a belief in the blues. I mean, in the Lead Belly and Robert Johnson, just knowing that he felt it. Like you can know that Stevie felt, and when he played, you could see he believed it. When you actually watch Stevie
Right.
Ray Vaughan, he believes in rock blues. That's what he believes in,
Mm,
and it's not a
beautiful.
joke. It's like he's not phoning it in. I
Yeah.
never saw him phone it in. Every video of him ever playing, he never looked like he was phoning it in at all. He's like totally engaged
Yeah.
on it,
That's
and that's
beautiful.
what you want somebody that loves what they're doing,
Yeah.
and then
That's
you
that's
believe it.
that's immersion.
Yeah.
It's what I would call somatic immersion. Like you're totally in it. Your whole body, your whole heart, your mind, everything is in that experience.
Now, there's some people kind of accuse people that are doing mindfulness of saying, "Well, you're being selfish." And how do
Yeah.
you counteract somebody who says, "Well, that's selfish"? How do you
Well,
explain to them that, well, that's the wrong
that's a
mindset?
really interesting question. And there is some of that going around like, oh man, you're just thinking of yourself. And I like to start with if you can't really listen to yourself, you can't listen to anyone else. And so if you don't really understand or know in a deep way kind of what you're about, you're not going to be able to understand or listen in a deep way to other people. And so it all begins with being aware of your own experience in the moment. Now, that doesn't mean it's the opposite of being selfish. You're doing it in service to others and the world. You're doing it so that you can be present, fully present with other people. Because here's what happens if you're not mindful about that. What's happening is that someone's talking to you, and let's say that they're somebody that you want them to like you, or you think they're impressive, or you think they're attractive, or whatever you think. And so they're talking, and what often people are thinking is like, oh, what's the coolest thing I can say? I got to say something that's powerful here. I got to say something that's really going to be really, get their attention and come across really cool. Now, how selfish is that?
Yeah.
Right? That's the flip side of it. And I'm here to say, if instead you just track that in yourself and you go, oh, I'm noticing I really want this person to like me. I want them to, recognize me. And you just notice that and name that in yourself, that lets you off the hook for saying something, that's all that. And instead you can pay attention to what they're saying.
Yeah.
They're going to notice that you're paying attention to what they're saying. And that's really going to drive the conversation into a more connected, authentic place than it would otherwise go. And you're going to have a much better experience overall that way.
Well, it's not that brings a point of like listening skills in an
Yeah,
age where, like, if you're always thinking about the next response or what you want to say, you're not actually listening, like you said, to the person.
right.
So, like, if you like in business, a lot of times, like if we were taught, they're like, well, if you compare it what the customer is saying, and point out that you actually listened, and then take a phrase that they said and try to link it to some aspect of the product,
Yeah.
right? So suddenly you're listening, and then you hear something. So, oh, I know how to connect this to something they might like. So you actually heard and said, well, this product offers exactly what you're looking for because you said you're interested in X. And I hear that you really want to be able to do that, and this thing can do that. Instead of going
Yeah.
down your spiel, you actually listen to try to hear where you can have an opportunity to engage this person because you're trying to find out what is it that they want.
Yeah. So that's like what I would call a level one sort of listening, in the sense of like you're listening to them and you're playing back what they're saying in a way to get them to do something that you want. Right. So there's a mechanical aspect to that. It's like it's absolutely true that if I sit down with somebody and I hear what they say and I just repeat their words, you've seen the old joke or the old meme about a therapist, and they're saying, and the guy says something like, well, I had a really bad day. I had a bad day. And then he says, yeah, my dog was ill. Oh, your dog was ill. You just say their words
Yeah,
back to them.
yeah,
And then in like
yeah,
2 minutes, they're going to go, wow, man, you're the best therapist ever. And you're not doing anything but speaking their words back to them. Now,
yeah,
as silly as that sounds, that actually really works. And it works to help people feel like you're listening to them. Now,
yeah,
the difference is, if in me I actually want something from them, like I want them to buy my car or buy my mastermind or buy my CD or my download or whatever I'm doing, then it's kind of like it's a matter of it could be unauthentic. Now, when you get to the place, though, where you hear them and you are connecting with what they actually are feeling, wanting, you see them as a whole person.
yeah,
Then, and you believe that what you've got is actually good for them. Like in my work as a coach, what I'm doing really helps people, and I'm not just making that up. This isn't off the shelf stuff that anybody can do. It's stuff that's important and it matters to people. It really helps their lives, really improves their experience of life. And I know that in my bones. And so I can say to people, this would be good for you. And I mean it because it's true. And it's true because, number one, I know it works because it's based on science. And number two, I really do care about people. I want them to have a better experience. I'm not just in it for the bottom line. I used to be a technologist. I used to work for Microsoft and speak on stages all across the world. And it's a lot easier to get paid as a technologist than it is as a coach. I can tell you that for real. So if I was in it for the money, I'd still be doing that.
yeah. Well, I was saying, sometimes in sales, people are always trying to come up with, the new way to sell the widget, and and I used to see like the infomercial, and now I see a lot of business podcasters,
Oh my God, yeah.
and they've come out and they've kind of taken what we do as like as podcast hosts that do original programming, and then we see people coming out with these like business oriented podcasts that are like sales calls.
Yeah.
And what they figured out is like, well, if I don't do a pre-packaged infomercial and I actually have a live demonstration of a product and I let people actually call in, and then I let people actually ask me about aspects, and then I can personalize answers to questions in real time, that I get a better response from their old pitched infomercial. So they're kind of using our real time interview capability to
Yeah.
sell products and have connections and then sell services and have it be real, because it's actually a real person responding to a live call or a live response. Or show me this, and then turn it around, or show me this.
Well, that's what people want. They
They
want connection. Yeah.
want to be able to, like, they physically came to the showroom and you showed them product X and you spun it around and you let them touch it and
Right.
you let them
Yeah,
see what it
exactly.
does. And
Yeah.
it's not just a film recreation. They get to see it for themselves. So they're more likely to engage if they feel that, like, oh, it can do this, it can do that. I actually asked him and he showed me and he answered my question in real time, and I have to wait and I have to go to the showroom. So I think like that type of thing is like, oh, I'm using this new tech so I can have real time sales call.
Yeah. In the technical world, they just call
Video
it,
call.
demo. You do a demo and you like let people see what the tech
Real
actually
demo, yeah.
does. And, that was my specialty, demos, doing technical demos for deeply technical audiences. And I did that for a lot of years.
That's awesome.
It was a ton of fun.
But now it seems like our podcast environment's been kind of transformed into that for a lot of the business oriented ones. But I still love talking to people in an authentic way,
Sure.
with live podcasting instead of scripted. Because I know some people are about perfection, so they'll do a scripted, highly edited, controlled podcast where everything gets like run through a mixer and then focus it like they're trying to master an album. I mean, I've
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
been
yeah.
more like, I rather talk to somebody in a real time situation because that's more of my forte. But yeah, I
Yeah.
understand people that want to do it the other way, but I think what happens is it feels like inauthentic.
Well,
it
that's the
feels
risk you run, right? Yeah,
yeah,
you run the risk of everything feeling scripted and disconnected. And I've been on mindfulness podcasts that were like that. It's kind of like the host is just kind of reading a list of questions. And he's going, "Oh, well, that's interesting. And what about?" And I would say something, and he'd say, "Oh, well, then, and what about?" He's just reading his questions. He's not
yeah,
really connecting with me. And I'm going, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, this is supposed to be a mindfulness podcast, and it was about that as a topic, but it wasn't really demonstrating presence.
presence. Yeah, I think that's the problem when you want to be so prepared that you take all the life out of it. You
Well,
think
you
like
run the risk of that. It's kind of like in my coaching. It's like I would take that and I would flip it around, saying there's something good about wanting to be prepared, right? That's a good thing. So how much can you do? What do you need to do in order to feel prepared and then also preserve spontaneity? Is preparation really at risk? And the truth of the matter is, once you become a lot more comfortable with being able to be present with what you know and who you are, and no matter who shows up, you feel like you're going to be okay, then you always feel prepared.
yeah.
You
I think it's like doing it. Like if you go and do something so many times, it's like muscle memory. You get like a practice memory from the act of actually doing what you do.
Yeah, I've seen these posts on Facebook, and somebody like on these coaching was and sometimes somebody will post something like, "What could you talk on for 30 minutes without any preparation?" And I would put, "Name something."
Yeah, anything.
It's like I could talk for a long time about a lot of things, and including things I don't know that much about.
Yeah, we can blue sky it. Well, I think you got to have the create. Like if you're a creative person, you can kind of like I'm into improvisational jazz
Yeah,
and
exactly.
experimental music. So the nature of what we do is do free form. And like I'll go and do free form Facebook events from my studio and just track it to my multi tracks.
Nice.
And to just go and say I want to try something. And a lot of times, some of my albums, I took those Facebook events and I actually turned them into tracks.
There you go.
Actually, they were like the artifacts of my you know what were gonna be my primary tracks to build off of. Because without sitting down and trying to pen it on the grid, a lot of those ideas I can make very tight ideas, but then a lot of times I throw them out because what I did live felt better.
Yeah, I hear you. I
And I
totally
went,
hear you. I used
yeah,
to
you go with
do
what
well,
you do live.
I used to do a podcast called The Connected Conversation, and I would I would show up. I had no idea what I was going to talk about. 3, 2, 1, go, and it would come out pretty. I don't want to like all that, but I'm an older character. I've got a lot of knowledge in my background because I've studied a lot with some really amazing people, and I practiced a lot. So I have all these stories and experiences, and I would just riff on a topic, just like and it was my form of improvisation in a way. And so, and I could take all of those and there was a lot of good stuff in there in terms of like, how do you mindfully communicate? Because I have a thing like with just a little bit of work, you can make every conversation in your life that you ever will have better. And how much of an impact would that make on your life? If I could give you 1 hour of stuff to do, just 1 hour of stuff to do, and you spent an hour with me, and I gave you, let's say, 3 exercises that took you 20 minutes a day, and it changed every conversation you will ever have for the better. Would that be worth doing? Well, kind of,
Yeah, I mean,
duh, right? Yeah,
it's a dumb moment, but
yeah,
it
exactly.
well, because communication is like storytelling and communication. Human beings like that's how you progress in our world
Well,
socially.
yeah, I actually had a TEDx talk that I was going to do. I got accepted to do 2 TEDx talks. They both got canceled due to COVID. And it was on this idea of mindful communications because in the TEDx talk, I would say something like, our ability to communicate, that the human beings as a species are limited by our capacity to communicate. Unless we can do it well, how can you build a city? How can you build a company? How can you transact a business negotiation? How can you engage in a marriage or
Yeah.
form a
And otherwise,
band?
when you have the bad communication, you get disaster, you get
You get
conflict, you get
disasters.
rebellion,
Yeah.
you get war. That's not productive.
Yeah.
That it takes the city you built and burns it down. You
or,
know, it's like so it's like when communication gets to that breaking point,
yeah.
when at a national level, a nation attacked another nation, the cities that you put all that work into as a community of human beings to build it,
Yeah.
you're burning.
And it
It's like
always
what
gets down to the individuals. It's somebody says, "Well, how can you?" It always gets down to a few key individuals and their consciousness, their capacity to connect, communicate, relate, and what are they connected to? If they're connected to power, money, possessions, authority, if that's what they're connected to, that's what they will generate in the world for themselves and for their like inner sanctum of folk. But if they're connected to something else, which is more like, the greater good, something less than I am the most important thing in the world, but
yeah.
rather the benefit of the many is really the most important thing in the world, because one day I'm not going to be here. And will my impact have been something that causes the world to be a better place or not? If you're connected to that, then the kinds of decisions you make are going to, and the kinds of conversations you have are going to be very different.
Yeah, if you have a benevolent mentality, right? Instead of like, I want an oligarchy and an aristocracy to pass down to these group of people to always control the seat of power,
Yeah.
versus I want to give the keys to the knowledge kingdom to everybody so that everybody could be their own self-made person. So
Yeah.
everybody could be happy, right?
Right.
Everybody could be fully self-actualized.
Yeah. Everybody can
And
thrive.
they're not gonna be my worker bee, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna go and make their own thing. They're gonna have their own happiness, and it doesn't mean they're in my factory. Doesn't mean they're in
Well,
my cubicle.
well,
They're actually doing
yeah.
what they want.
Everybody, we elevate each other. It's like, what would it be like? And this is something I think about a lot, because I had a big experience one day in a process where the particular kind of thing I was working with was that I'm not somebody who's had a lot of help in my life. I've had to do a lot of things on my own without, no one coming in and showing me how to get things done. I had to figure stuff out. And, this is what they call a self-reliant type. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not bad. It's just that there's too many of us in the world. And what that means is I don't know how to rely on other people. I don't know how to trust other people. And we have a whole culture that's kind of built on that, right? And so I asked the question, what would it be like to live in the world where you felt like the community and your culture had your back?
Yeah.
Instead of like, well, you're going to go down if you don't get out and get productive. And if you don't want out there, if you need some food, you better pee in a cup to prove that you're not, rather than that, it was like, we got you. We're going to elevate you. We're going to help you thrive. And there, at some places, a core belief, a foundational core belief. Some people believe that given the opportunity to thrive, that people will just sit at home and eat chips and watch TV and they won't do anything because they don't have any needs. I don't believe that's true about people. I think
No, I
that
don't think so.
what's happens is people, they become more creative and engaged, and if they have the opportunity. Now, that's a fundamental belief. And the underlying thing about this whole conversation, in a way, is that mindful people do less harm.
Yeah.
And consequently, it's a lot harder to be really selfish, self-centered, and greedy when you're mindful, because you become aware of what that feels like. And the alternatives are much better. They feel much better.
Yeah, mindfulness is a very good deterrent from being put into the kind of numbness from, like, I was a sociology major, being affected by anomie that might make you sit at home eating chips and drinking beer and not engaging, right? Because you're kind of disconnected from society because you feel like there's no opportunity.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, some folks have been kind of put into that box, because if you get everybody in a mindful mode, there could be more productive people. And more productive people might not be willing to be sitting in that cubicle, sitting on the
Right.
assembly line, just
Yeah.
doing what somebody tells them to do.
Well, right. We were talking about third force, right? And the things that come in and shake you up. And like COVID was that, right? Because it's like suddenly everybody's at home and they're not
Right.
at work. And suddenly it's like, well, who am I? It's like you in Japan. Who am I in Japan? This is a whole different culture. Look at what's happening here. I didn't even know this was possible. And so people suddenly are at home instead of work going, this is really different. And in some ways, it's a lot better. And consequently, I'm getting in touch with the way I feel doing work from home. And so we have this great resignation and this big fight about going back to work as a requirement, because who really needs to do that? In some cases, you do need to, but in other cases, a lot of times it's just somebody at the top deciding that that's what's best, and they're not really connected to what people actually need. And
Yeah.
people need a lot more connection and safety and a lot less. You have to be superhuman, overdriven, a superhero to succeed. And by that, we mean basically pay your bills.
Yeah. I'm a software developer as my day job.
Oh, yeah. Is that right?
Yeah. And I've been I made a decision to be remote before the pandemic. I've been remote for 5 years. And I had been a road warrior because I had been in Japan. I'd been all over the place.
Yeah.
And I got sick of doing it. I like being in a place like Japan because I was like there for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times you're someplace for 6 months in Minneapolis, then you're in Canada, you're wherever, and you're always moving. And I got tired of that. And a lot of what I do, I work with teams from all over the world, and we can work totally remote. I've got multiple screens, all kinds of connections. I know, and I actually have been able to prove to some executives that me and my team actually get more done from home because we're not in the Uber, we're not in the plane, we're not in the hotel, we're not getting sick because we were on the plane and the Uber, and we're actually more productive, and we're putting in 12, 14 hours of actually getting work done. You can see it, you can track it.
Yeah, you can see every time you check in a library, you can tell, right?
Yeah, you can see what we're doing, and we're actually putting out we're building the stuff. So you can find us, you can Skype us, you can team us, you can figure out where we are, you can actually see if we're doing what we're doing. And some people are just insecure and they want to micromanage and they want to be able to kind of come into that row of cubicles and to tell somebody what to do. But if that person had to take 2 hours to get there and 2 hours to get back home, and it's 4 hours a day, they can't do anything.
That's right.
Is that really productive? It really isn't.
It's anti-productive.
Yeah. And plus the mindset of your worker is like they're stressed out. They're
gonna be exactly
sick. They're gonna probably burn out, and they're not gonna give you the best work.
That's what I'm saying. It's anti-productive. You're actually subtracting quality and productivity with that kind of management style. And there are a lot of people who do that. They just, there's a lot of managers who insist on kind of creating these worst case scenarios for their workers and demanding that they produce in environments that are orchestrated to fail.
Yeah.
And
it's not going to work. But there's enough of us that are forced in the kind of, I think a lot of us have gotten to the point where we've become aware of what we want. Right. So once you make the decision that I don't have to satisfy the boss, I have to satisfy me.
Yeah.
Then I can satisfy whatever environment I'm going to work for that has aligned to my values and aligned to what I want to do.
Right. And so I love that.
That's a different mindset, but a lot of people are scared of that. There's
I love that very much, because what you're talking about there is what I call having a center. It's like, so what you just did is you named I'm not going to align to what they're doing. I'm going to align to my own values, my own center. And so you're saying my center of gravity is in me. And I'm going to be in the world in a way that is aligned with who I am and my axis and my values, rather than I'm looking out there for other people's values and I'm going to adopt those. And other people do that. They do that all the time. And they become basically, you can tell people are kind of in orbit around a certain belief system or an organization or a religion or a political belief, and who they are is actually clustered around external values and beliefs rather than coming from an internally resourced place.
There's no center. The center is like outside.
Yeah, it's because so the point is, if you don't have that center, someone will give you one.
Yeah.
And you'll be in orbit around them.
There's a lot of people who want to give you that.
And that's right. They'd love to, because it's easy to manipulate people that way.
Yeah, because I mean, that's what I started to find out. I was in the cubes for years and I got sick of it.
Yeah.
Because to me, being an artist, I'm like, I'm a creative person. This is actually a creative enterprise, but they're trying to turn it into a factory.
Yeah.
And the factory is going to get defects over time when it gets like too monotonous and not interesting.
Yeah.
So if you want that creative mindset that's going to do innovation, you have to look at like the innovative leaders. They started like saying, oh, you can have a standing desk with a you could actually exercise at your desk. You could go walk to play pool in some of these startups, and you've had freedom to be able to not be in the typical cube structure. And then you had the freedom to think out the box and have, meetings about something outside of work, or do something totally non-conventional thinking where you started to understand the creative mindset. The same person that's the poet, the artist, the painter, they don't tend to be that conducive to sitting in the cube.
Well, I hope not. I don't know who is.
Yeah, so that's not going to create the great idea sitting 8 hours in the cube. And I think they somehow think it is, and it's like, well, how could that happen? Human beings are not like that.
And to be honest, as far as I can tell, if they're asking you to sit in a cube, they're not looking for great ideas from you.
Yeah.
And if that's who you are, then the best parts of you are being underappreciated, and not only that, but squashed. And so, like we were talking about, the culture that has your back, the society, we can't remanufacture the culture, but you can change who is around you. You can change the people that you interact with in a way where you feel supported, encouraged, and enlivened by them rather than suppressed. That's a big deal.
You have to start to brand yourself, because I think of the future of everything. I've been talking on this podcast to multiple people who created their own brands as entrepreneurs, as artists, as authors, as filmmakers. They've gone out and done their own thing. They become independent, built their own structure, decided to go out on their own because they got tired of being part of the organization that maybe wasn't satisfying anymore. They hit the critical point and it wasn't serving them anymore.
Yeah.
And then they decided that they could brand an idea or a service or a product and actually bring something to the table that was uniquely them and very satisfying to them as a person. And that right there is like, if you're going to be on this planet, don't you want to be happy? You want to be like just barely getting by, saying that's okay, because it's like it's the same thing every day, but it's not very inviting. And it's like, well, why would you want to live like that? Why wouldn't you want to maybe take the risk of being happy?
Yeah, exactly. And and you can be happy without having a gigantic job. It's more like, can I be happy looking at a sunset? Can I be happy being present with this particular moment in time? And can I be happy just being the goodness and the creative force that I am in the world? And I'm speaking like to a musical environment, musical creatives out there. It's like, those of, people in your audience, they tend to be really creative folk. And it's kind of like the fire, the passion, the spark that arises in the soul of you that manifests out into the world. That's a big deal. And that in and of itself has tremendous value to the world. And whether or not other people are willing to pay you $1 for it doesn't
Yeah.
change the fact that it has tremendous value.
Well, I think once you put something in the world, what we find as artists is like once we start using our own independent tools, and we don't have to be with the record company, and we can own our own masters, and we own the rights to our work, and then we put it out there in the world.
Yeah.
We find we get opportunities to monetize it through licensing, that
Cool.
we own it, and the brand, and the record company doesn't own it, we own it. So if somebody comes to me and they want to put it in a commercial, I get all the money. If they want to put it in a video game, I get all the cash. And
Nice.
it's like it's all about cash, but the fact is, you don't necessarily have to be a big brand name to have something as a creative piece of work and actually start to actually make money from it. And
Mm-hmm.
people are kind of in the idea, well, I got to be like Taylor Swift or something. No, you don't. You could actually be smaller, a lot smaller than that, and actually do a lot better than what you would expect if you just start to understand what you do is valuable and have the courage to actually express it and put it out so people can hear it or see
Well,
it or
that's the
view
key
it.
thing, right? It's like you've got to, and and I don't want to be dismissive or minimize people who have a big creative thing and a small voice in terms of they don't feel confident in putting things out. It's like blessings be unto thee, so to speak. But it's like my hope, my wish is that they find a creative, a safe context in which to explore that, because we need those creative voices in the world now more than ever. And so people can hopefully find their way to give voice to that creative side of themselves in a fully embodied way. It would be my wish for those folk.
Well, I find that through my meditation, it gave me like a clear mind
Yeah.
in my practice. And when you find something that starts to settle you down and make you less anxious and less like agitated, then I think it's like the law of attraction. Like if you're somebody that's very prickly, that's very agitated, like things aren't going to come to you because you're not really in a positive state. You're kind of radiating. You got a lot of like uncertainty. And if you feel if you start to find a way to make yourself love yourself and believe in yourself, it's infectious. Like people will start to like, yeah,
Yeah.
what he's doing. That's like, because if you show you're not scared, and like that's a hard thing for some people to get to that point. But for me, it was a process. I had to go through the cancer, and then I got to
Mm-hmm.
a point where I wasn't scared and I was willing to present. And however anybody gets to that moment, however they get to it, they get to it. But it's like if you can get to where you can love yourself and express yourself, it's going to help in your communication at a microcosm level and a macrocosm level with your personal relationships and societal relationships, and that's a positive for the whole world.
Yeah. And if you can't get there, if that's your struggle, let that be your voice. Let your voice be about that struggle. It's kind of like, oh, I feel so like constrained, but I have this thing and I'm fearful to put it out there. Speak about that. Do your poetry about that. Do your work about that. Let your music be about that. Let that be about whatever is true for you, because that's your truth. And whenever you speak that truth, you're undeniable. No one can tell you you're wrong. No one can shame you because it's true. And it's a super powerful place to be. So thank you for naming that so clearly.
Well, I think that's how people find out if they're going to be a mentor or a teacher or a coach. Is like some people's path is maybe not to be the artist that creates a body of work, but to take the process that they learned, like they were in that bad spot, and then
Yeah.
they came out of it, and then they learned how to voice it, and then they actually learned how to teach what they did to get out of it. Then that becomes their creative capability, because like
Yep.
if you can do that, then that becomes that you become the coach, you become the life coach, you become a man, maybe you become a shaman, maybe
Yep.
maybe it depends on what level you're at. If you're like I'm a really spiritual, I'm going to go all the way to that, right? And I'm going
Yep.
to be at that level, and that's how you can actualize, and it's a
Well,
process.
as they say, you teach from your wounds, right? And so it's like a beautiful allegory that the wounded teacher, and that's the only way you can do stuff that's really true and real is if you walked through the fire yourself, and so that otherwise it's like what we talked about earlier. It's like you're just reading the cliff notes, the bullets, and it's not really alive in you. But when it's alive in you, you know what you're talking about, and you know it because you did the work.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a relationship coach talking about successful marriages, but you had like 7 divorces and you're not married right now, it's like, well, what are you teaching me? What are you teaching me?
How to find new relationships.
Yeah, man, that should change the focus. Change the focus.
Exactly. Yeah, beautiful. That's really good.
But yeah, I think it's I love having these authentic conversations to get to the root of what this is. And we've been talking about mindfulness and the concept of it is kind of an Eastern thought that a lot of the Western world I think is starting to really need it. And sometimes you have to search outside your comfort zone. It's from your societal mores and norms that like you might have had a certain structure that didn't really encourage it. Or like, oh, I poo poo that foo foo. That's not something I'm into. Or that's like, a lot of people they put labels on something. As soon as they do that, they're like, well, I'm going to stay away from it. But I think people are finding that they need something that you can't put on a graph, put on a spreadsheet. It's
Yeah.
something that's deeper, right? That's not logical. That like it's a feeling. It's heart. It's soul. You can't
It's
map that
it's all of the
sometimes.
above. It's like off the map and it's also on the map, but it's also it's like there's a phrase, the map is not the territory, which means, it's one thing to have a map of the Grand Canyon. It's another thing to visit it. Right. So
Yeah,
you can say, oh, yeah, I know what the Grand Canyon looks like. And you can look at the map and you can say, it's this big, it goes here. It's another thing to stand at the rim of the Grand Canyon and go, holy crap.
get the
Now,
Colorado River.
who knows better? Yeah, or the Colorado River. Who knows better the Grand Canyon, right? So the map is not the territory. You can't confuse the abstract notion of these ideas with the actual experience of them. And that's why, whatever people think of the word mindfulness, I don't care. Erase that word. And let's call it instead connection with what is actually true for you now. Let's just call it that. And in a way, and say, is that a good thing? Would that be helpful in the world if people were connected to what is true for them now? And then in my work, I take it a step further and say, and give voice to that. And this is what you and I are talking about with the creative part, right? What's true for me now is I have this creative urge in me, and I want to give voice to it. That's what's true.
Yeah.
Well, what does that voice want to say? Well, let's explore that.
Well, I think that's what people sometimes they need a push or they need to outside themselves. That's why they go to a mentor. That's why they go to a coach. That's why they would talk to somebody like yourself, because some people they don't have the tools because they didn't learn it in school. They didn't learn it from their parents. They didn't learn it from their spouse or their significant other. They didn't know what to do. And they keep on hitting the same thing. So what do you do? Is like if you keep on hitting the same problem, sometimes you have to seek assistance. And like you say, some people want to do it all themselves. And sometimes there's a point where you can't do it all yourself. There's a point where you have to
I mean, you can't do anything big by yourself, and mindful work or the work of going internally and really exploring is not something you should do alone, because we're by design, humans are interactive creatures. No human on the planet ever was born alone and grew up alone, ever. You had to have someone take care of you till a pretty late age. If you're left on your own until you wouldn't live a few days, right?
Yeah.
So we have relationships wired into us from the moment we're born in a fundamental way. Whereas if you didn't have someone take care of you, you would be dead. And
yeah, we're so delicate. We need that kind of relationship. You need that care and assistance. You're not like a viable creature right from the start to take off.
Yeah. And
It's
so,
like
so
a
those
sea turtle
relationships are,
just jump in the ocean, just like take off, and
well, you can't, right? I mean, you need a kid to stop. Somebody has to stop you from sticking a fork in the electric socket when you're 2 years old because you've got a fork and there's a hole right at your height. And you go, oh, look,
well, that's what
it's
you do.
someone
Dude,
has
this
to
mother,
say, no, that's a bad idea, And
all
if
the
they
bad
don't,
ideas.
you aren't going to make it. And I mean, Lord knows it's a wonder I'm alive. But the point is that our nervous systems are wired from the moment we're born to be relational. And so, but then we wind up in a culture that actually subtracts the value out of. They want you to be independent. They want you to be
Yeah.
you're all on your
Self-reliant.
own. Nobody's going to do it for me. I have to, and so it goes backwards from the way that we actually are. Now, I'm not saying you want to live in a world where you're dependent on everybody to stay alive. But at the same time, if you don't have to get too far under the hood to realize that we actually really are dependent on other people to stay alive.
Well,
Every
even
single day.
some of these executives, they're so it's into self-reliance. They're like, how many people did they actually connect with on their road to get where they are?
Well,
Right?
right.
How big is their Rolodex?
Yeah.
How many
Yeah.
people had to, and they kind of try to do the self-made thing a little too much. It's a
You
little,
think?
yeah, it's a little like, tell me, like, is it really like how many other people on the way to that situation? There's a lot of communication. There's a lot of connections.
There's a lot of
And
luck too.
there's a
You
lot.
know,
There's luck and there's luck, but there's a lot. It's rare that it's totally. I did it all myself. Really,
nobody
nobody
ever
really
did
does
it all
that.
themselves, and I will go to the mat on that. Nobody ever did it all themselves because it's easy to prove. Like we just said, from the time you were 0 to 7, you were not on your own.
Yeah, no way. It wasn't happening. But yeah, I thank you again for being on the show. I want to remind people that you go to https themindfulcoach.com and that will be fully clickable. We are going to be published on all the major platforms this podcast can be viewed or listened to. We provide you with a landing page where that will be tomorrow. And that will allow people to just go wherever they feel comfortable watching or listening to the podcast. But I want to thank you again for being a guest on the Family Look Goes podcast. That was very insightful. I think I encourage people to click on that link to get deeper into this topic. And I want to thank you again for being a guest on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. It was a ton of fun.
Thank you. Have a great night.